It's something which I hope will be enjoyed by everybody around here. And it puts together two of my major interests, which is on economic history and the maritime world, and specifically on the Coromandel region. Now, everybody knows or vaguely knows that the Coromandel trade was an important trade. Even more vaguely, people know that India was a key figure in medieval trade, in pre-modern trade, let's call it that way. But as I have been grumbling to a lot of people of late, people don't seem to know the geography and the way in which India is so important to this world of trade. So I'm going to start with a whole lot of maps. This is the maritime world of Asia. Look at the way in which India lies in the center of this world. Look at the kinds of connections. I have left out most of the ports because if I start putting all the ports in, there won't be any place to see the outlines of the countries. But look at the kinds of maps that the kinds of connections that exist. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but that's the Red Sea, the Horn of Africa, the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Sea, the Bay of Bengal, then through here, around right up to the South China Seas, or through this, the Straits of Aceh, and up into the South China Sea, the Isthmus of Kra. All of these are words that keep coming up in the course of our discussions on trade. Now, this word was connected in two ways. One is through the ocean, and the other is through the land. Now, what you can see up here, the lines up there, are actually the old Silk Route. But look at the number of connections that go off in different directions, leading off from this spice route. I'm not sure whether you can see it, but then I've put over here the three major travelers, the medieval travelers, 13th century travelers, John Plano de Carpini, William Roberquez, and Marco Polo. All of them combine the land and the sea routes. And what I want to underline here is that these routes are unknown to the Europeans who come in, but they are not unknown to the Asian merchants. Because all of these descriptions of the routes, you don't find in travelers who are coming from the Asian and the African world. For instance, Ibn Battuta doesn't bother talking about it. It's also familiar to him that he doesn't feel the need to talk about it at all. So also Abdul Razak, 15th century traveler, he doesn't even bother. He only tells you that he landed at Mangalore and then he went overland to Hampi, to Vijayanagara, the capital kingdom. He doesn't need to bother telling us how he came from the Persian Gulf up to Mangalore, nothing. So this is a world which is both known and unknown at one and the same time. Within this world, I'll be focusing on one very small part, which is the Coromandel world. The Coromandel world technically extends from approximately there, Point Calumet, right up. I've given only the South Coromandel, but it goes right up and includes up to about almost Machilipatnam is called the Coromandel Coast. Internal connections go all the way across into Malabar, into Karnataka, into Odisha. So there's an intrinsic connection between the sea, the coast, the hinterland, and therefore of the entire peninsula. It is this peninsular region and this coast that becomes key in the trade of the medieval world. I'll concentrate on the medieval world. Okay, the trade, as we all know, or we ought to know, is driven by many things. However, intra-Asian trade, which means the trade within Asia, is driven primarily by three products: horses, spices, cotton cloth. Horses are particularly important in India because India doesn't produce war horses. So India needs to import the war horses from mainly Arabia. And there is the port of Basrur on the Karnataka coast, which is regarded Bankapur, Basrur, Honavar, Bhatkal, and Goa. These were traditionally the major ports through which horses were imported. At a later point, Basrur becomes much more crucial in the export trade of rice, but it remains. When Goa is lost to the Portuguese, Honavar takes over, Bhatkal takes over. So these become the points of entry for the horses. Spices is Malabar primarily, but the spices are not only Malabar. The spices come from the Southeast Asian archipelago and from there through India into the rest of the world. And the currency, if you like, for much of this is actually cotton cloth. So crucial to the trade is the cotton cloth. In India, there are three major areas in which textiles are produced: Gujarat, Bengal, Coromandel. Notice how all three areas surround the cotton producing area in black cotton soil of Maharashtra. And surrounding these three, you have the three key areas. Two of these areas border the Bay of Bengal, and they have always been important in the trade. Gujarat and Bengal is primarily known for fine cotton. Coromandel was known for more coarse cotton. Gujarat and Bengal were known for what comes to be called muslin. I'll come back to this a little later. Coromandel was known for calico, long cloth, a whole variety. Again, I'll come back to this. Gujarat cloth went right across from Gujarat into Aden, across into Africa. And there is a lot of detail that is available on how the Gujarat cloth went from Gujarat into Sofala, into Ethiopia, from there into Central Africa, and from there into West Africa. Gujarat cloth, in fact, drives the West Asian trade in a very large way. It's believed also that some of this cloth was exchanged for slaves. Bengal cloth is luxury cloth. So it is used across Burma, India, some of the best. And there's a reference to the cloth of Bengal being the finest cloth that the young man about town should be wearing when he goes out in the evening. This is in an early text, but the Bengal cloth is known very early. Coromandel cloth does not have this kind of luxury aspect, but it definitely has a very wide spread. Bengal Coromandel cloth is the basic currency for exchanging for spices. When the Europeans came into Asia, they discovered that they wanted spices. They mainly wanted pepper. They discovered that Malabar is very good for pepper, but then the even better pepper is available in Sumatra and Java. And then they wanted cinnamon, which is Ceylon, Sri Lanka. So, but all of these spices were far easier to get when they had Coromandel cloth. So 30 kinds of cloth are exported according to the 16th century Portuguese traveler Tomé Pires. Says 30 kinds of cloth were exported from Pulicat to Indonesia. And he says, and this is a small fraction of the kinds of cloth that you will find around the Asian world. Jean Huylen van Lanshoten, he is a Dutch traveler. He says that there is a great traffic into Bengala, Pegu, Siam, Malacca, and also to India. That is, he's talking about the trade in horses and spices, which goes into all of these areas. Textiles, as I said, were key in the Intra-Asian trade. So Burma exchanged rice, traded for the textiles by the Bengali merchants. Then there is the cotton cloth, which goes from Coromandel into Southeast Asia, exchanged in Southeast Asia for spices. The spices then also exchanged by the Chinese merchants, exchanged for silk cloth and for spices. But if you didn't have the cotton cloth of the Coromandel, you couldn't. Cotton is something which determines the ways in which the products flow. Please remember that this cotton cloth is only the cloth that goes into this export trade, into this whole intra-Asian trade, is only a fraction of the amount that is traded within the country. So we haven't got any estimates, but we do know that when the Europeans come, they are additional buyers. They are not the only buyers. The Europeans are constantly complaining about the competition from the Indian and the Asian merchants, and constantly complaining that they can't do anything against the Asian merchants because the Asian merchants know the country and they don't. So the production of the textile could expand to meet the European demand. It did not at this point initially cut into the available supply of textiles. And this is perhaps the best comment on the nature of the intra-Asian trade. This is written in the early 17th century by Jan Pieter Koen, the Dutch governor based in Pulicat. He says, piece goods meaning small scale, little bits of smaller bits of cloth. They're always called piece goods. Piece goods from Gujarat we can barter for pepper and gold on the coast of Sumatra. Reals and cotton. Reals is gold, and cotton from the coast, that is Coromandel. Instantly, when the Dutch and the British talk about the coast, they mean only Coromandel or Bengal, usually only Coromandel. Reals and cotton from the coast for pepper and bantam. Sandalwood, pepper, and reals we can barter for Chinese good and Chinese gold. We can extract silver from Japan with Chinese goods, piece goods from the Coromandel Coast in exchange for spices and other goods and gold from China, piece goods from Surat for spices and various other trifles. One thing leads to another, and all of it can be done without any money from the Netherlands and with ships alone. One of the major features of India that needs to be constantly reiterated is that India had a flourishing money economy. Contrary to colonial perceptions and colonial historiography, India's money economy exists from a very early time. There is a good market for all kinds of things, and this is paid for in money. By the time we get to the Mughals, the money economy has spread all over. We find in the peninsula, we find maybe not money itself, but we find the value of the coin very well known. So for instance, we've got Chalukya inscriptions of the 8th century, which say that the value of one Gadyana, a gold coin, is to be spent on this function in a temple. So the coin as a unit of value, the coin as a unit of currency, and the coin as determining the patterns of trade, all of which is very well known in India from a very long time. From the time of definitely the Roman Empire, there is discussion about how India is this bottomless pit for gold. So all the gold of the world comes into India, and Pliny the Elder, in fact, comes up with the first drain theory in the world when he says that the wealth of Rome is being depleted because the nobles of Rome are wasting the gold of Rome in useless luxuries and trifles from India. India did not require anything that the world produced. They might have wanted them, but they didn't require them. It is the reverse that is very often true. There is one Jesuit traveler in Mongol countries, I think, I don't remember, Bernard Kunz, I think, I forget his name. But he said that the Mongols have their excellent steel, but remember that the steel that we fight with also comes from the same place. It comes from India. So even the Crusades, they say, are being fought with Indian steel and Indian products. China does have the production, but China is not as open as India was to the world's trade. And so when the medieval world talked of Asia, they meant India. This is, in a sense, the role of India in the medieval world of commerce. I'm not talking trade any longer, I'm saying commerce. Okay, Coromandel. Now, mention of Coromandel comes in different a little detour. The word Coromandel is a derivation from the unit, the administrative unit of the Cholas. So it is Chola Mandalam, which, given the trouble that most people have, including Indians have with Tamil names, it becomes Coromandel. It is actually Chora Mandalam. It has become Coromandel, it is accepted as Coromandel, so I will continue with the word Coromandel. It is at center of long-distance trade in textiles from antiquity. In the Manimekhalai, there is mentioned, the Manimekhalai, the second of Tamil epics, the first being Shilapadikaram, the second being the Manimekhalai. There is mention of Aruvai Vaniyar, which seems to have been the term that referred to cloth fabrics. Then inscriptions from definitely the 7th century onwards, right through till almost the 16th century, talk about Shilai Chettis. Today, parts of Tamil Nadu, especially the Coimbatore, Salem areas, we still have Shilai being cloth. Ravikai, Shilai, all of these are still words that mean cloth. So there are references to Shilai Chettis. In the Sangam literature, there is all kinds of descriptions of sea, of trade, of the landing of horses, of the trade in horses, of the great ships that come with their billowing sails, and how they knew how, and there are positively lyrical descriptions of the kinds of ships that are coming in. And what is important is that they say that they are coming here with their ships filled with gold and horses in order to buy the great aromatic spices that exist in India. This is the basis of the trade. Coromandel cloth is important enough in Southeast Asia in that right up to the 12th or the 13th centuries, Coromandel cloth was the only medium of exchange in Sumatra for spices and silk. Java had a money economy. Sumatra got a money economy rather later. So Sumatra, which is the source for much of the cloves and the cinnamon and some of the black pepper, all of it is only in exchange for Coromandel cloth. Now the trade routes. I'm going to very briefly go back to my first slide and show you some of the trade routes of Thursday. Now, one of the standard routes was from Aden across to Kochi. Then there is one which is from Ormuz, which takes you right to Gujarat, then down to Chaul, Goa, and along the coast. But what is interesting is to note that according to the time of the year and the winds, the ships would make their way to one of these courses, one of these ports. Here, Madras, Pondicherry, Karaikal, somewhere in between is Nagapattinam. Okay, here, Nagapattinam. Okay, so Nagapattinam, if you take a line across from Nagapattinam, then you can go through what is called the 10-degree channel, which is between the Andaman and the Nicobar Islands, and go straight across to Burma. Then overland, it can be taken across here and then through here. So one route took them from Nagapattinam to Burma. There's another route, which is Nagapattinam to Aceh. There's a third route, which is Pulicat to Malacca. There is a fourth route, which is Nagapattinam across into Manila. So it comes from here, down here, through this, and across into Manila. These are routes which have been described over and over again by people from, well, references to it exist from definitely the early medieval period of the Pulicat Malacca route is mentioned as being one of the most important in the 16th century. The Nagapattinam Manila route is mentioned in the 17th century, and the way it is mentioned, it is very clear that it is not a new route. It's merely new people who are working on the route. So the Nagapattinam Manila route is in fact dominated by Armenian merchants. And it says that the Armenians have access to the Spanish gold, because at Manila, they exchange the goods with the Spanish ships that come into Manila, and they get the gold from Manila and they bring that into Fort St. George. British keep grumbling because they don't have any access to any of the gold that comes from the Spanish trade. But the Armenians are able to get it. And the Armenians, incidentally, Armenians are to be found in Mexico as well. And they are the ones who have come via India into Mexico finally. This is one. Now, Coromandel cloth it's called the Coromandel Coast is therefore called in Portuguese records, it's called the left arm of the Moluccas. And without the textiles, the trade in the Moluccas would be dead. Moluccas being, again, what is also called the Spice Island. This is by Tommy Irish. Indian cotton fabrics, particularly Coromandel fabrics, are of three kinds. Block printed only, block printed and hand painted only. All of you would be familiar with the kalamkari textiles. What do you know? Well, the word kalamkari itself is hand painted. Kalam as in pen, kari as in work. So kalamkari is hand painted. And I don't know how many of you were there for the first lecture by Praveena, but Praveena talked about archaeology being something that is important. Even when you have the texts, we have a piece of cloth that has been discovered, that has been excavated in Fustat, Old Cairo. And that piece of cloth is from Gujarat. And if you put it together, you can actually see the blocks, the joining line for the block, because a block is a small, okay, easier way to give. See the little elephant that I have at the bottom of each of the slides? Now that elephant is a block. And that is picked up and it is put into the die and then is stamped across the border. Gujarat and Bengal textiles are usually printed all over. Coromandel textiles are distinctive for their borders. Many of you would be familiar with the kinds of temples, the designs that we have on the temple walls. Those designs of horses, elephants, maybe just tendrils going all over the place, maybe just vine kind of things. All of these you'll find across all the temples of South India. These were the designs that were found in the borders. And these were always used. So we've got flowers. Our main designs in the South are flowers, peacocks, and sometimes leaves. English records, Dutch records call these paintings because they are painted cloth. Certain areas are known for certain kinds of cloth and they acquire fame. Each area acquires a certain degree of importance, and these are some of the names. Salimpur, Dongri, Moris, Rumals, fine muslin, checkered, somewhat fine, betilas, long cloth. Salimpuri is apparently a white or off-white coarse cotton cloth printed all over or along the border with either red or green flowers. Dongri is something that you should all be familiar with. That is the source of the word dungaree. Many of the youngsters used, at least back in my time, the dungarees were worn by a lot of mechanics because it was thick, coarse cloth. And it lasted up to a whole lot of wear and tear. It's also the basis of the kind of jeans the jean cloth that one has in later times. The dongri was sailcloth. The English used it to make trousers for their sailors because they said that this withstood the wet and did not shrink very easily. Moris are a particular cloth which is usually blue in color. Rumal, of course, is a fine muslin, finer cloth, but it could also be a coarser cloth. And the rumals, they say, are used to tie things up. And fine muslin, checkered, somewhat fine muslin, muslin cloth, all of us know. And muslin cloth of late has been used. I'm told that muslin cloth is used across the United States as it is sold as cloth which is used for spreading out in prams and on using when we have a newborn baby in the house, then they talk about the muslin cloth. And the muslin cloth that you look at over there is actually the same kind that is described over here, checkered somewhat by. Bitillas is from the Dutch, from the Portuguese word bitilla, meaning a veil. So a fine, thin cloth could be used and was used in England and in France as veils for hats, because women had to cover their faces. I mean, you had this little veil that protected the face from the rays of the sun, and so you had the veiling. And then long cloth. Long cloth was typical of Coromandel. Longer than any other cloth, so usually 36 yards by 3 yards, sometimes 32 yards by 3 yards. But the point of the long cloth was that it was so long that it could not be woven inside the house. And so Coromandel weavers used to set up their looms outside under the trees. And here, it also said that the records of the Dutch say that the long cloth was always done by the weavers in the early hours of the day when the dew was still available, because they said that it is so long that they need the moistness of the dew to make sure that the thread does not snap. In the heat of the day, the thread will snap and it will become brittle, so the cloth cannot be manufactured any longer. So they say that all that the Coromandel weaver needs is a grove of trees under which to set up his loom. So he can travel anyway. They didn't all that much, but anyway, that's what they believed. However, please remember that this was not the only kind of cloth. So for instance, a place near Mausoleepatnam called Eluru produced the best Persian-style carpets, and there are records of the Golconda kings which talk about sourcing Persian-style carpets from Eluru. And here it says that there is one description which says that the Persian-style carpets are made again under the trees. So you've got these two looms, two cross bars, and it's like that. They are set up outside, and they are set up at a height where a child can go underneath and snip and tie the knots under the carpet so that the thread does not come loose again. So you've got a whole lot of information about the kind of manufacture that also happens. And then come the Europeans. Now the Portuguese have a lot of records about the kinds of cloth, but they don't actually, I haven't looked at the Portuguese records much, but what the English wanted was the calicos to use as wall hangings. Then you have chintz. Were used as bed covers, tablecloths, and then there is mention of gingham. Gingham is a word that is of Malay origin, but it is basically a checked cloth. Again, I don't know if it's still used in the school, but I seem to remember when you showed your video right at the beginning, Smriti, then at that time, there was this school uniform of checked blue and brown, the school uniform. Now that's gingham. So gingham was used for curtains. So you had starched, checked red and white or green and white gingham, which was used as curtains, later as a table cover. Current scenario, we can't go into this thing, but in many of the restaurants in Bangalore, particularly the restaurants on 100 Feet Road in Bangalore, you find that they have a red cloth at the bottom, and on top of that, in a diamond shape, is a red checked cloth. That is gingham, something which is still used even today. Okay. All of us are familiar with, at least all of us who come from Tamil Nadu are familiar with the word podavai. Podavai today means a sari. Inscriptions from the 7th century onwards give us references to Podavai Tari, which is a tax on looms. We don't know whether it was the long cloth, but we do find it. Every part of the Coromandel region produced a different kind of cloth, and each cloth had a specific market. So in Southeast Asia, the red cloth from near the, from Masulipatanam, Arumugam, Armagon, Pulicat, and from parts of the Tuticorin area, the Thoothukudi area, were demanded as a method of protection. You find that in Maharashtra, we'll find that many of the auto rickshaws have a little bit of red cloth tied around their meters, and it is replaced every so often. Also in Maharashtra, what is often used is that a red cloth is what is used as charhana, as given to the goddess. So it is a method of protection. Yellow and white cloth are reserved for royalty. Yellow dye is rather more difficult to make, and white is a pure white, requires washing either in the Krishna River or in the Narmada River, because the chemical properties of the Krishna and the Narmada are such that the cloth becomes whiter when washed in that water rather than when washed in any other river's water. So probably required a little more work. Yellow is very often from mustard, but it is also a dye that one gets more from Gujarat area than from the Coromandel. So if it is going into Southeast Asia, it is a Gujarat cloth which is coming into the Coromandel and from Coromandel across into Southeast Asia, or directly from Coromandel into Southeast Asia. So yellow and white are reserved for royalty. Contrast this to Europe, where purple is used for royalty, and purple incidentally is produced only in the Byzantine Empire, which is why purple becomes such an important color. The Hikayat Banjar, which is a 17th century Malay text, says that cloth from the Tamil coast is used to cure diseases. Cloth is also used as a gift. Specific kinds of cloth from the Tamil coast is used as gifts for those who cure diseases. There is a text of the 12th century, 14th century, which is called the Basava Purana, which lists 54 varieties of cloth that are sent to Indonesia. And then there is the black cloth, which is used for death rites, payment for services. There is a striped cloth, traditional markets, and traditional designs. So black cloth was favored for everyday wear, white for the burials by the Minambako of Java. Blue color is very common. Muri in the English records, Murin in Portuguese, Nilakacha in Tamil. Light blue cloth is in great demand in Java and Sumatra. The Nagapattinam area produces a cloth which is striped blue and white. That is demanded both in the Southeast Asian, in Java and Sumatra, as well as in Africa. So there is a record, an early 16th century record, which says that the blue cloth of the Indian coast, the Southeast Indian coast, is to be found in great quantities, is demanded in great quantities in Sofala. And it is to be purchased in Kochi or in Kannur and then taken across from there by the Portuguese. Of course, they also say that thanks to the kind of monopoly that we have got, the supply into Sofala is rather less. So the weavers of Sofala have now taken to separating the thread, and then they mix it with the white and the yellow that they get from Gujarat, and they reweave the cloth in order to make a different kind of cloth. And now let me go on to the merchants. Through much of the medieval period, definitely from the 8th till the 16th, till the 17th century, till the 14th century, in very large quantities, and from the 14th century rather less so, the trade is dominated by merchant guilds. Inscriptions refer to groups of merchants who are identified as Ainutruvar, Valanjiyar, Ranadesi, Manikramam, Anjuvarna. Ainutruvar is very important, Ainutruvar being also called the 500. Ainuru being the word for 500. Valanjiyar, probably the generic term from merchant. So Valanje, Vanijya, Valanjiyar, and therefore Bania. Nanadesi, Manigramam, Anjuvanam. Anjuvanam is something which seems to be working much more in Kerala. And we find that the Anjuvanam included Jews, later included Muslims. And I'm using the word Muslim very generically because it meant the records often talk about the Turki, the Rumi, the Arabs, all of it. So there's a whole bunch of them. I'm not going into the origins, but they're all included in that. The Ainut River is perhaps one of the most important. Maximum inscriptions refer to the Ainut River, and they are found in inscriptions across peninsular India, across Indonesian archipelago, across and right up into China. There are references to there is one reference which comes from Thailand, which says, one inscription from Thailand, which says that every year a certain sum in gold is being paid by the Ainut River to the local city council, it sounds like. So they are paying to the city council in order to continue their association with that city and with that trade. And this is one of the 500 inscriptions. Then there are references to the Ainut River all over the place. Maximum number, if anybody is in. This has been worked on extensively by Mira Abraham, and she's worked on the Ainut River, the Manigramam, the Anjuvanam, the Ainut River. There's a lot of work. Late, recently passed away, Professor Vijaya Ramaswamy did a lot of work on that. So her work also has been of importance in this. Southeast Asia, as I've been saying over and over again, is a key market for Indian textiles. And this market, here is where I want to get into another aspect, which is that colonial historiography tended to say that Indians did not travel abroad because of this fear of loss of caste because of crossing the water. However, Gujarati merchants are to be found, Chetty merchants are to be found. There are any number of merchants who are to be found in markets of the world across from Aden, possibly Jeddah, Aden, Bandar Abbas, Hormuz, right across, right up to Manila. You find various kinds of Indian merchants being there. In fact, there is a French traveler, Abbé, in the 17th century, who says that the Indian merchants, he met, as always, he met the Indian merchants who were regularly to be seen in the markets of Aleppo on the Black Sea. So you've got one of the major problems that we have is this thing which says that Indians didn't trade. Indians traded everywhere with everybody and were to be found everywhere. Early in the 16th century, Gujarati merchants are reported to have dominated the trade of Malacca. And this is a trade which, these are Gujarati merchants mainly from Cambay, port of Khambat. They are to be found regularly trading with Cambay. There is a merchant, there is a man who is appointed as the governor of a port by the Pandya king. His brother was the governor of the Persian island of Kish, and he himself was somebody who was working with the Pandya merchants. And his major deputy was a Chetty merchant from Tirunelveli, apparently. Malacca could not live without Cambay, nor Cambay without Malacca. So this kind of cross-breeding connection is constantly there. Go back to the beginning, and I will say that all of this is rooted in the production of cloth, and obviously the skills of the weavers. Weavers are a major community. We find references to lots of castes of weavers, the Kaikola, the Chalia, the Devanga. There is a part in Madurai, which is near the temple, which is called the Devanga Choltri. Devanga is a group of weavers again. Patterns, as I've said, are dictated by tradition. When the Europeans came in, they discovered that if there was even a small variation in the pattern of the cloth, then that cloth could not be sold in that market any longer. Once there is mention of one set of, cargo that the English took to Java, which they accepted, but they discovered that they could not sell it in Java because the design was not correct. Apparently, the design required, now the English were very confused on this, so we don't know whether the design was a red flower on a black background or a green flower on a red background. Because one set of letters says one thing, another set says something else. But then they said that the flowers should have 5 petals. Because they don't have 5 petals, they have 6. And people of Java refused to accept that cloth. And so possibly, I mean, this is totally hypothetical. I suspect that it's because all of this cloth couldn't be sold, that they started selling all of this cloth in Europe, because Europe didn't have a traditional demand. All of these were unusual Oriental designs. What one gets is information about a tremendous degree of specialization. So Kaikola weavers produced a certain kind of cloth to be sold in Java. Chalia weavers produced the cloth which was sold in Sumatra. There is another category which is called the Pattu Nool Kara. Pattu being silk, so Pattu Nool, silk thread. They make the kind of cloth which is sold in both within India and in Africa. Any number of details one finds. There is an inscription of 1538 which describes how much yarn is to be used in a particular kind of loom, how it is to be used, and by whom it is to be used. So this kind of detail we find in all of these. Let me now go into the designs themselves. Now this is a blow-up of a mural to be found in the Lepakshi temple. I picked this up because of the 3 kinds of designs. One gives you flowers, one gives you checks, and one gives you flowers without a border. So smaller flowers, then a checked pattern. This is probably the centerpiece, probably block painted one, kind of thing that one got in block painted. The 2 on either side are possibly hand painted. Okay. Notice the borders on all of these. These, incidentally, are borders that one still finds today. We go to the next. These are pictures of, these are from Borobudur. Look at the similarity that you find in the designs. These are from the temples of Borobudur, and these are on the walls of the temple. Look again at the similarity of the design. So you've got this kind of design, and you've got this here. You've got this pattern, and marginally changed, you've got it over here. You've got the diamond shape, and you've got over here, the diamond shape over here, with different things. Each market demanded a specific design, a specific. Look at the, for those of you who are looking at the screen, look at the large, the one without the detail, and look at the kinds of designs that you find in the center. And look here at the designs in the cloth that you find at the borders. All of this is part of that, of the market that they produce. Each is marginally different. So if you look at the detail, then the detail gives you the variations in the design. This kind of design you will not find in the sculptures of Sumatra or in the temple, the sculptures in China or in Manila, because these are specific to the Borobudur area. And then you go into the European demand. Marie Antoinette is reported to have paid a fortune, 2 fortunes, one for the famous necklace and the other for the muslin dress that she made. It is reported that the muslin was specifically woven demanded by the French East India Company, and it was woven to the specifications sent in, and it had to be as fine as could, so fine that when held up, it looked like a veil, but was thin, where you could not see the body through. It looked as thin as a veil, but you could not see the body through. This is also the time when, I don't know how many of you remember that fairy tale that used to be popular. But the fairy tale said that the king demanded that it should be if whoever married the princess would have to find a piece of cloth which was fine enough to go through a small ring. Muslin was reported to be that cloth which could go through a small ring. When we go into the Antwerp Museum, the first thing that greets us is this dress. This is a chintz dress. Designs are different. Designs are now catering to the English demand, to the European demand. And they didn't want the kind of detailing that was typical of the earlier period. They wanted only this. And so they decided to look at designs which are suitable to European tastes and not to Southeast Asian or Asian tastes. I have taken here, this is from Jessila Stephen's work on oceanscapes. I have taken from his account a map of the weaving settlements that are to be found in the Coromandel region alone. These settlements are only one fraction of the number of settlements that we find across the peninsular region. Many of them, I've just taken this part of it. Those who are interested can look at Jessila Stephen's work. He's gone into details about how much is made and where it is made. This is the amount, and this is why I said right in the beginning, that the trade in the Coromandel trade caters both to the interior and to the part outside. So it caters to both the internal market and to the external market. They were capable of handling all of this. And the amount of cotton produced was also enough to cater to all of these demands. Almost at the end, I'm taking you into something totally different. Botticelli's Birth of Venus. Look at the calico cloth over here and look at the calico cloth over here. Note the similarity in design. By the early 18th century, by the late 18th century and the early 19th century, this kind of cloth began to be called sprig muslin because it's got sprigs all over. And it was declared that young debutantes had to wear gowns of sprigged muslin in order to their first appearance at the first ball given in their honor. I believe there is research going on this calico cloth specifically to see whether Botticelli could have possibly had access to some of the designs that Vasco da Gama took back with him to Portugal. That is something that I cannot comment on, but that is something that possibly they talk about. And finally, what happens in the 19th century? In the 19th century, there is, with the establishment of colonialism, with the coming of the Industrial Revolution, there is a very clear attempt to break the monopoly, the range of Indian textiles. And so caricatures such as this began to come up, where it says, the cat upset the tea table and the tongs, and the fire jumped out of the hearth to set the muslin on fire. And so they said, muslin should no longer be worn. Better to wear the fine Lancashire cotton, which would give you the appearance of muslin without the delicacy of muslin fabric. Thank you. I think I'll stop over there for now and let's go into questions.
Thank you, Radhika. And I particularly liked your mention of the Botticelli. It was lovely the way you brought in all these different connections to Indian trade. So we do have a lot of questions. I'll start with some simple ones first, where Ayana Anthony wanted to know, are there any pieces, extant pieces that are still available, pieces that were traded during the medieval period?
A lot of them. Unfortunately, not too many here in India, but they're available. There are pieces in the Ashmolean Museum, and Ruth Barnes has curated an entire collection on Indian textiles in the Ashmolean. So there are a lot of pieces that are extant, and some of these. There are also a few are to be found, I'm told, in Singapore. This I've not seen, but I'm told that there are a few pieces that are available in the Singapore Museum as part of the university. That I don't know. But I do know that they are there in the Ashmolean. They're also there in the Victoria and Albert Museum. Indian cloth is much more, in India, the museums have it more from the 18th century onwards. Because the thing is, I suspect that we were so used to our cloth that we didn't bother preserving it. It was there all the time, part of our requirement.
Okay. Okay. Kannan Sundararajan asks, so he spoke a lot about the Coromandel cloth, but he wants to know, what about the block printed cloth made in other places like Jaipur and Jodhpur and Barmed and all? And kind of linked to that, Minu Rebecca wants to know, what about the Dutch trade in cloth from the Malabar coast?
Now, Rajasthan cloth is much more used in the internal markets. It is not used for the long distance trade. So we find references to Bandini very frequently. We do have a lot. Jodhpur is mentioned very often. Jaipur is not. The key centers for the manufacture of the Rajasthan cloth seem to have been Jodhpur and Bikaner. But most of them seem to have been used for the overland trade. That is, they are taken very often into Multan and from Multan into Central Asia. It's thicker cloth and it's very often used as carving, as dupatta, as stuff like that. So the Rajasthan cloth seems to have been much more in the internal market rather than in the external market.
Okay.
The Dutch cloth of Malabar is again very specific because the Malabar cloth is used primarily in 3 areas outside India. One is Madagascar, the second is South Africa, and the third is Aden. Those are major areas where the Malabar cloth is. But I will say that the Dutch are not so keen on the cloth trade of Malabar, except insofar as it affects their pepper monopoly. So they use the pepper monopoly, they want to keep the pepper going and they want to monopolize the pepper, and they discover, much to their horror, that they can't monopolize either pepper or cloth because there are too many ways across the Sahyadris into the Coromandel. So people bypassed the Dutch and went into the Coromandel or into Andhra and sold it off from there. Malabar cloth is, however, mostly to these areas.
Interesting. Okay. Arvind Sethi wants to know about the Dakshin Path. Was it connected to the sea routes? Was there competition for this trade? And did that competition fuel the Pallava Chalukya rivalry in the 6th to 8th centuries?
That is something on which actually we don't know very much. The Dakshina Patha, as referred to in the earlier records, do not seem to have taken in the entire peninsular region, because the Dakshina Patha is a route which apparently starts off from, well, Patna or thereabouts and ends near Bharuch. So it is to take the top of the peninsula just south of the Satpura range. Okay, so the Vindhya Satpura. We don't really know whether there were connections to the Dakshina Patha, to that Dakshina Patha in the Chalukya Pallava. What we do know is of a later period where, 7th century, you've got Pulakeshin going in and claiming that he has defeated the Lord of the Three Oceans, and he has defeated the great navy of all the lords of the ocean. It goes into, we talk of bombastic today, but that is bombastic. He says, I am the Lord of the Three Oceans. I have encircled the world with my belt. The three oceans have created the belt that encircles my waist. All of that. He doesn't do any of it, but he talks about that. The control of the production areas is definitely a key feature in the Pallava Chalukya, the Chola Chalukya, the Pandya Chola Chalukya. All of that is definitely a major feature.
Mm-hmm.
We do not have the sources, or more accurately, we haven't really looked at those sources in enough detail to be able to comment on how important that was. So
okay.
That's the state of the research. And I will say that I have not looked at the Pallava Chola Chalukya conflict. I've looked more at the Chola Chalukya rather than the Pallava.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Sure.
Rangaratnam Gopu says, so you spoke a lot about the merchant guilds. Are there guilds who made the looms? Are there carpenter guilds? And are there any texts which talk about the loom designs, or are there any reports by Europeans about the particular designs of looms?
There are texts about designs. There is a Persian text, for instance, which is of the 9th century, which talks about the kinds of 9th, 10th century, which talks of designs. There is a 13th century Sanskrit text called the Yukti Kalpataru, which talks about carpentry design of various kinds. There is, unfortunately, the Bhagavad Purana, which is a text which ought to have it. I haven't been able to get my hands on the entire text. I've only been able to access the section on the textile, the cloth itself. But I am told that there are parts of it which talk about carpenters. We do not get any information, any references to guilds of other kinds of artisans. But in the Chalukya records, in the early Chalukya records, there is mention of the school of stone cutters. This is 8th century. Then there is mention of the school of those who learned how to write on, so carvings on, so inscribing on stone. Mm-hmm. So they are taught how to inscribe on stone. So there are schools which teach them. So that says that this inscription has been carved by so-and-so person who belongs to the school of so. That kind of information comes in.
Okay. Quite a few people want to know about the medicinal cloth that you mentioned which came from Tamil Nadu. What was that and why was it medicinal?
We have no idea.
Okay.
Absolutely no idea. It's just that there is source after source after source which says this is used for curing diseases. Okay. How it is used, whether it is made with a particular dye which has medicinal properties is what we suspect. We have no clue.
Okay.
There is, and unfortunately those bits of cloth are not available. So we can't even do any analysis of that. So we don't know. Okay. Sorry, I did do one part of the question, which is on the European sources. The Dutch records have a lot of information on technology, particularly weaving technology in the Masulipatanam region. So the Dutch records are a major source for technology.
Okay. Guganesan Ilavarsan has a couple of questions. He wants to know if there are any accounts of pirates in the Malaccan waters in the 16th to 18th centuries, particularly in the context of, I believe, the Armenians getting the conquistador gold from South America via the Portuguese in Manila. And did they have to pay the British anything to store this gold in Fort St. George?
Oh, no, they didn't. Because in 1688, I think, the the head of the Armenians signed a treaty in London by which the Armenians were given the right to trade in every part of the dominions of the British on the same terms as the British themselves. So they didn't have anything. So they that, and there is letter after letter after letter from 1690 onwards saying they made a mistake. Now the Armenians are undercutting us. So our trade is suffering because the Armenians are trading much more than we are. Any amount.
Okay. Okay. There is a question here from Pranjal Shah, who wants you to say a few words about the influences of textile on architecture and vice versa. You spoke about it a little bit, but could you speak a bit more?
Now, one of the things that I think I've been saying this often to a lot of men, that designs are very often those which can be replicated in many ways. Okay. So the design is usually that which is from nature, which can be stylized in different ways, and then which gives you a different dimension of technology and science. So the design is usually from nature. So you would find along the temples, you find very often on the temples carved along the bases of the pillars, you'd find these designs that are curved like that. Some of the best of the Lepakshi murals have some of the best of these designs. There, actually, you can do for those who are interested, do an online search for Lepakshi murals, and you'll find a set of designs which look like grapes. Now, if you put it like horizontal, then they look like little triangles. And if you put it vertical, they look like bunches of grapes. So it is, I think, what one needs to remember is that the design is adjustable. The source of inspiration is nature. So most of our designs are flowers, leaves, trees, birds. There are Masulipatanam and north, up from Masulipatanam up to Ganjam. One of the standard designs that one finds in both the temples and in the cloth is a stylized parrot. And that parrot has a very sharply curved beak, and that beak will stand out very prominently in both the stone and in the cloth, because that is carved very sharply. So the Tamil word kilimuk, so kilimuk is very sharply, the nose of the parrot is very sharply defined. You move further south into Karnataka, and you'll find that one of the traditional designs is the open fan of the peacock. Now that fan, so it's open, so it would be either open fully like that, or it would be partially open, or it would be curved like that and that. Now, if you change this design a little bit, so it stands out like this, if you like. Okay. You change that design a little bit and it becomes a lily, which you'll find in the later designs. So it's a matter of inspiration, creativity, all of that, but there is a cross connection between borders and temple designs. Then in a lot of the temples, you'll find on the pillars, you'll find the toran that's being carved. So the toran being the decoration that one puts in. Now, that will have the flowers dropping from it. The same thing in a cloth is used not in curves like that, but it is used in a series of wave-like movements. So you have this, and you have a flower over there, then you have that, and you have another flower. So what you get is the toran with a flower. Now in cloth, it is changed into a wave with something above and below. So you've got the design that goes down. So there is what one of my teachers called cross-pollination. So you design going in all ways. Something that I would like to add is that this is something we need to look at much more in terms of technology. What kind of science goes into the design? What kind of, and I talked of painting. Now, who makes the paint? What kind of dye is used? How is the dye manufactured? We know that from a 1780s series of letters, we know that there is a long drawn out process for making dye. So it says in order to make the dye, the root, this is the che plant, the madder plant, the root of the che plant, which gives us the red dye, that has to be boiled in an iron pot with twice boiled water. It has to be buried in sand, and you have to have a pit which is made, which has green wood above and dried wood below and sand all around. And that has to be constantly fed. Both have to be constantly fed for a period of 21 days. The fire cannot be allowed to go out. Then it has to be covered with fresh wax that has been got from, and here's something which should interest the people of Karnataka, which has to be got from the areas where the Kaveri rises, because that's where you get the best honey and the best wax. So it has to be fresh wax, and that has to be carried so that it is still moist when it comes to the coast to be covered. And this is sand and it's on the coast. Which coast we don't know, but it has to be covered. It has to be allowed to cool for another 21 days. Then it has to be taken out, and you'll find the solid dye at the bottom. That dye has to be, he goes into details about all of this. Then, but what is interesting is that he says that after it is broken up, it has to be mixed with water. And then they come and they add different metals into it or minerals into it in order to change the color. Alum apparently gave it maroon. We don't know which mineral they added in order to give it a purple color. We do not know what mineral they added to keep it red. But there is constant mention about how they add an agent which makes sure that the color does not fade. So this man says that I have at great personal cost and the threat to life and limb managed to steal one piece of this solid dye, which I am sending back to be examined in our laboratories. And he says, we must particularly look to see what it is that they add, the chemical component of what it is that they add, to make sure that their colors stay fast. No matter, the cloth might tear, but the color will not run. The color will not fade.
Wow.
Was later as
Wow, that was very detailed. Wow. Just two small questions. One is from Raja, who wants to know, when did the Indians first start to stitch cloth?
Probably Harappa times, because we've got a wooden needle that has been found in one of the late Harappan sites. So probably begins over there.
Okay.
Very early.
And the second and final question is, so you spoke a lot about cotton trade. What about the trade in silk? Was that of a similar scale?
Silk seems to have been much more used within the country than for the export trade. China silk seems to have dominated the export trade of Asia. The Indian silk, and instantly today we talk about the Kanchipuram and the Dharmavaram and all of those. We find no references in the inscriptions to silk in Kanchipuram or in Dharmavaram. The silk that we find is Munga, Tasar, all of that is Bengal, much more. So it's Bengal silk, and on the Coromandel, on the Konkan coast, there is a place called Chaul, Revdanda, which is known for its silk manufacture. And it does not talk of silk until much later.
Okay. So that was the last question. Thank you so much. Actually, there are lots more, but then we're just going to stop because there's not enough time. But thank you, Radhika, for such a wonderful, deep dive into textile history. Smriti, I will just hand it over to you to do a proper thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. I think, we have lots of conversations on trade and, textiles, but it's nice to hear somebody who has researched on it for so long talking about it rather than it just being something we think about and talk about. I have a couple of things to add for tomorrow. Unfortunately, Gwen Kelly, for on certain unavoidable reasons, is not able to give the talk tomorrow. So we've had to, like, unfortunately cancel that talk. We're really sorry for the inconvenience of that. But the day after that would be Gayatri Iyer's talk on the art and architecture of Karnataka, specifically talking about Chalukyas and Hoysalas. So we really do hope you're able to join us for that. And like, see you day after. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah.